The dust from the stagecoach settled around her worn leather boots as Theresa Norton stepped down onto the main street of Independence, Missouri, clutching her carpetbag and a wooden case containing every book she owned in the world. She had traveled 1,200 miles from Boston with nothing but determination and the promise of a teaching position, only to find the town schoolhouse was a crumbling structure that looked like it might collapse with the next strong wind. It was late August of 1873, and the heat pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy wool blanket. Theresa was 22 years old, unmarried, and determined to make something of herself despite her father's protests that teaching was no proper calling for a woman who should be finding a husband. She had left behind a comfortable life, a suitor her parents had chosen, and everything familiar because she believed education could change lives. Now, standing in the dirt street of this frontier town, watching cowboys ride past and hearing the distant sound of cattle lowing, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "You must be Miss Norton." A woman's voice cut through her doubts. Theresa turned to see a sturdy woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I'm Margaret Sullivan. I run the boarding house where you will be staying. Welcome to Independence." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan." Theresa adjusted her grip on her bags. "I was hoping to see the schoolhouse." Margaret's expression grew somber. "I will take you there tomorrow. First, let us get you settled. You look exhausted from your journey." The boarding house was clean and well kept, a 2-story wooden structure with lace curtains in the windows. Margaret showed Theresa to a small room on the second floor with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. After Margaret left, Theresa sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself one moment of doubt before squaring her shoulders and unpacking her belongings. The next morning, Margaret walked with her to the schoolhouse. The building sat at the edge of town, a single-room structure with a sagging roof and broken windows. Inside, dust covered everything. The few desks were in disrepair, and there were no books, no supplies, nothing but bare walls and disappointment. "The last teacher left 6 months ago," Margaret explained. "He was an old man who could not handle the rougher students. The town has been looking for someone ever since." "Rougher students?" Theresa asked, running her finger along a desk and watching the dust swirl in the morning light. "Some of the older boys. They work on the ranches and farms, and their parents want them educated, but the boys themselves do not always see the value in it." Margaret paused. "There is also the matter of the ranchers' children. Some live quite far out and only come to town occasionally." Theresa looked around the dilapidated room and felt determination rising in her chest. "Then, I will have to make them see the value. And I will need to make this place worthy of learning." Word spread quickly through Independence that the new schoolteacher was a young woman from Boston who was not afraid of hard work. By afternoon, several townspeople had stopped by the schoolhouse to introduce themselves and offer help. The blacksmith promised to fix the stove before winter. The general store owner's wife said she had some old primers her children had outgrown. A carpenter named Mr. Henderson said he would repair the worst of the damage to the building. Theresa spent the next week cleaning, organizing, and preparing. She wrote letters to her former teachers in Boston, asking them to send any books they could spare. She used her own meager savings to buy paper, pencils, and chalk from the general store. She swept and scrubbed until her hands were raw and her back ached. On the Saturday before school was set to begin, a wagon rolled up to the schoolhouse while Theresa was washing the windows. She climbed down from her ladder to see a tall man in his early 50s stepping down from the driver's seat. He had weathered features and kind eyes, and he removed his hat as he approached. "Miss Norton, I am William Everett. I own the Double E Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Mr. Everett. Theresa wiped her hands on her apron. How can I help you? I came to talk about my son, Robert. He is 24 years old and never had much schooling. His mother passed when he was young, and I needed him working the ranch. But he has always regretted not learning to read and write properly. William shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. I know you are here for the children, but I was hoping maybe you could spare some time to teach Robert as well. I would pay you extra, of course. Theresa considered this. She needed the money, certainly, but more than that, she believed everyone deserved an education regardless of age. I would be happy to teach your son, Mr. Everett. Have him come to the schoolhouse after the children's lessons end each day. Relief flooded William's face. Thank you, Miss Norton. Robert will be here Monday afternoon. That Sunday, Theresa attended church services in the small, whitewashed building that served as Independence's house of worship. She sat near the back, conscious of being watched by curious townspeople. After the service, several families introduced themselves and promised their children would attend school starting Monday. Monday morning arrived with golden sunshine, and a cool breeze that promised autumn would arrive eventually. Theresa stood at the schoolhouse door in her best dark blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. By 8 o'clock, 15 children ranging in age from 6 to 14 had gathered in the schoolroom. They sat at the repaired desks, watching her with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. "Good morning," Theresa said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Miss Norton, and I am very pleased to meet all of you. Let us begin by introducing ourselves." The morning went better than she had dared hope. The younger children were eager and attentive. The older boys, including two rangy 14-year-olds named Jake and Peter, who she had been warned might cause trouble, seemed willing to give her a chance. She taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, moving between the different age groups with practiced ease. When the children left at 3 o'clock, Theresa tidied the classroom and waited. At 3:30, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She went to the door and saw a man dismounting from a handsome chestnut gelding. Robert Everett was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He had strong features, intelligent brown eyes, and a cautious expression as he approached the schoolhouse. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "Miss Norton, I am Robert Everett. Please come in." Theresa stepped back to let him enter. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and he seemed to fill the small schoolroom with his presence. He smelled of leather and sun-warmed skin and the outdoors. Robert looked around the room, his eyes taking in the clean floors, the mended desks, the alphabet written neatly on the chalkboard. "You have done a lot of work here." The townspeople helped. Theresa gestured to one of the larger desks. "Please sit down. Your father said you wanted to improve your reading and writing." "I can read some," Robert said, settling into the desk with obvious discomfort. His long legs barely fit under it. "But not well, and my writing is worse. I can sign my name and do basic sums, but that is about it." "Then we will start there and build on it." Theresa pulled up a chair beside him, close enough to see the book but far enough to maintain propriety. She opened one of her primers. "Let us begin with some simple passages." Robert read haltingly, his finger following the words, his brow furrowed in concentration. His voice was deep and pleasant, and Theresa found herself noticing the way his hands, roughened by ranch work, carefully turned the pages as if the book were something precious. After an hour, she closed the book. "That is enough for today. You read better than you think you do, Mr. Everett." "Robert," he said, standing up. "Please call me Robert, and thank you, Miss Norton. I know you must think it strange, a grown man learning his letters." Not at all, Theresa said firmly. Education has no age limit. I think it is admirable that you want to improve yourself. Something shifted in Robert's expression, a warmth entering his eyes. Same time tomorrow. Yes, and bring something you want to be able to read. A newspaper, a letter, anything that matters to you. After Robert left, Theresa stood at the window watching him ride away. There was something about him that intrigued her, something beyond his obvious physical strength. There was a gentleness in the way he had handled the book, a genuine hunger to learn that she recognized because she felt it herself. The weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Theresa taught the children during the day, dealing with their varying abilities and occasional discipline problems with patience and firmness. In the afternoons, Robert came for his lessons. He proved to be a dedicated student, practicing his letters each evening and returning with questions and observations that showed he was thinking deeply about what he learned. By late September, the leaves on the cottonwood trees along the creek had turned gold, and the air had taken on an autumn crispness. Robert's reading had improved dramatically, and they had moved on to more challenging texts. One afternoon, Theresa had him reading from a volume of poetry she had brought from Boston. "I wandered lonely as a cloud," Robert read, his voice gaining confidence, "that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils." He looked up at her. "I have never seen a daffodil. They are spring flowers," Theresa said. "Yellow, very bright and cheerful, they grow wild in the English countryside." "Have you seen them?" "No, I have only read about them," she smiled. "That is the magic of books, Robert. They can take us places we have never been." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the page. Then he said, "You could see them. You do not have to stay in Independence forever." "I like it here," Theresa said, surprised to realize it was true. "The town is growing on me." "What about Boston?" "Do you not miss it?" "Sometimes I miss certain things. The libraries, the concerts, the ocean, but I do not miss the life my parents had planned for me." She had not meant to be so honest, but something about Robert invited confidence. What kind of life was that? Marriage to a banker's son. A house in the right neighborhood. Endless social calls and dinner parties where women were expected to look pretty and say nothing of substance. Theresa closed the poetry book. "I wanted more than that." Robert nodded slowly. "I understand wanting more. After my mother died, my father needed me on the ranch. I never questioned it, but sometimes I wondered what else might be out there." He paused. "Then I realized that what I wanted was not somewhere else. It was to make something of myself where I am." "That is why you are here," Theresa said softly. "Yes." Robert met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding and connection that made Theresa's heart beat faster. "That is why I am here." As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first frosts, Theresa noticed that Robert often stayed after his lessons ended. He would help her clean the chalkboard, carry in firewood for the stove, or repair small things around the schoolhouse that needed fixing. Their conversations ranged widely, from books to ranching to their dreams for the future. Theresa found herself looking forward to those afternoon hours more than she wanted to admit. One Friday afternoon, after Robert had finished reading a particularly difficult passage from a history book, he set the book down and looked at her seriously. "Miss Norton, may I ask you something?" "Of course. You have been teaching me for 6 weeks now. You have taught me more than I ever hoped to learn, but I wonder if you might teach me something else." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Will you teach my heart too?" Theresa felt her breath catch. "Robert, I do not understand." He stood up, moving around the desk to stand before her. "I think you do. These weeks working with you, talking with you, I have come to care for you deeply. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are intelligent, determined, kind, and beautiful. I think about you from the moment I wake until I fall asleep at night." He took a step closer. "I am a simple rancher, Miss Norton. I do not have fancy words or city manners. But I know what I feel, and I feel something powerful for you. I am asking if you might feel the same and if you would let me court you properly." Theresa stood up, her legs unsteady. She had known her feelings for Robert had grown beyond those of a teacher for her student, but she had told herself it was inappropriate, impossible. Now, looking into his earnest face, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, she could not deny the truth. "Robert, I am your teacher." "My lessons could be finished," he said quickly. "I have learned enough to get by, or I could study with someone else if that would be more proper." "No." Theresa reached out and placed her hand on his arm. "I do not want you to stop learning, and yes, I feel the same way. I have been feeling it for weeks but thought it was wrong to acknowledge it." Robert's face transformed with joy. He took her hand carefully as if it were something precious. "Then it is not wrong. Theresa, may I call you Theresa?" "Yes," she whispered. "Theresa, I will court you properly. I will speak to Margaret Sullivan about it, so there is no impropriety. I will come to dinner at the boarding house on Sundays. I will take you for rides in proper daylight where everyone can see we are respectable. I will do everything right because you deserve that." "And the lessons?" she asked. "Will continue," he said firmly. "You were right when you said education has no age limit. Besides, I want to be a man worthy of you, and that means continuing to better myself." That Sunday, Robert came to dinner at the boarding house, bringing flowers from the last of the season's blooms and a basket of apples from the ranch's orchard. Margaret Sullivan, after extracting assurances from both of them that everything would be conducted properly, gave her approval. Several other boarders were present at dinner, and Theresa enjoyed watching Robert navigate the social situation with natural courtesy. As autumn deepened into November, Robert and Theresa were often seen together. He came to town on Sundays, and they attended church together. He took her for rides in his wagon, showing her the countryside around Independence. He introduced her to his father, who welcomed her warmly to the ranch for dinner. The Double E Ranch was larger than Theresa had imagined, with a substantial house, barns, corrals, and hundreds of acres of grazing land. William Everett clearly doted on his son, and over roast beef and potatoes, he told stories of Robert's childhood that made Robert blush and Theresa laugh. "He was always curious," William said, passing the potatoes, "always asking questions about everything. I regret that I did not give him more schooling when he was young." "You gave me what I needed, Pa," Robert said quietly. "You taught me how to be a man, how to work hard, how to treat people fairly." "And Miss Norton is teaching you the rest," William said with a smile. The lessons continued 5 afternoons a week. Robert had graduated from primers to novels, and they were currently reading their way through several of Charles Dickens' works. Theresa loved watching his face as he discovered new stories, new ideas, new ways of seeing the world. But increasingly, the lessons ended with them sitting close together, talking about everything and nothing, their hands sometimes touching, stolen moments of intimacy in the fading afternoon light. One cold November afternoon, as the first snow of the season fell outside the schoolhouse windows, Robert finished reading a chapter from Great Expectations and set the book down. "Theresa," he said, taking her hand, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "These months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have changed everything for me. You have opened my mind to new ideas, new possibilities. But more than that, you have opened my heart." He turned to face her fully. "I love you. I am completely and utterly in love with you." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. "Robert, I love you too. I have loved you for weeks but was afraid to say it." He pulled her gently into his arms, and she went willingly. He was so warm, so solid and real. She rested her head against his chest and heard his heart beating rapidly. "Marry me," Robert said softly. "I know we have not been courting long by some standards, but I know my own heart. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a future together. Marry me, Theresa." She pulled back to look up at him. "What about my teaching? The children need me." "Then keep teaching. We will make it work. The ranch is only 10 miles from town. You could stay at the boarding house during the week and come to the ranch on weekends, or we could get you a horse so you could ride back and forth each day. Whatever you want, we will figure it out. I will not ask you to give up something that matters to you. You would do that. Let me continue teaching. Theresa, I fell in love with a woman who crossed a continent to teach children in a frontier town. Why would I want you to be anyone other than who you are?" He cupped her face gently. "Say yes, please say yes." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Robert kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that felt like a promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theresa laughed with pure joy. "We should tell people," she said. "Your father, Margaret, the town. Let us tell them together." Robert pulled her close again. "But first, let me hold you a moment longer." They told William that evening when Robert brought Theresa out to the ranch for dinner. The older man embraced them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I could not be happier," he said. "Robert, your mother would have loved her." They announced their engagement at church the following Sunday. The town's reaction was enthusiastically positive. Margaret Sullivan immediately began planning the wedding, declaring it would be held at the church in early December. "No point in waiting," she said firmly. "You two are clearly in love, and we could all use a celebration before winter truly sets in." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Theresa continued teaching during the days, but her evenings were filled with dress fittings, gift receiving, and planning. The town had embraced the upcoming wedding with enthusiasm. The women quilted a beautiful wedding ring pattern quilt. The men built new furniture for the couple. Even Theresa's students were excited, the younger children constantly asking about the wedding. One afternoon, 10-year-old Sarah Miller raised her hand during arithmetic. "Miss Norton, will you keep teaching us after you get married?" "Yes," Theresa said firmly. "I will keep teaching. Marriage does not mean the end of doing what you love." She saw several of the older girls sit up straighter at that, and she realized she was modeling a different kind of life for them, showing them that women could have both love and purpose. The week before the wedding, a package arrived from Boston. Inside was a letter from her mother and a beautiful ivory silk shawl that had belonged to Theresa's grandmother. "My dear Theresa," the letter read, "your father is still angry that you left, but I have been following your letters with pride and interest. I am sorry I cannot attend your wedding, but please accept this shawl as a token of my love and blessing. You have chosen your own path, and I am beginning to understand that it was the right one for you. Be happy, my darling girl. That is all a mother truly wants for her daughter." Theresa cried when she read it, and that evening she showed the letter to Robert. They were sitting in the boarding house parlor, properly chaperoned by Margaret, who was knitting by the fire. "I am glad she understands," Robert said, holding Theresa's hand. "Though I am sorry your parents will not be here. You and your father are my family now," Theresa said, "and this whole town has become family in a way." The wedding day arrived cold and clear, the first week of December 1873. The church was packed with townspeople. Theresa wore a simple but elegant dress of deep blue wool with the ivory shawl around her shoulders. She carried a bouquet of dried flowers and evergreen branches. Robert stood at the altar in his best suit, his hair neatly combed. his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but moving. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Robert kissed her tenderly, and the congregation erupted in applause. Afterward, there was a celebration at the town hall with food, dancing, and toasts to the happy couple. William Everett stood up, his glass raised. "To my son and his bride. Robert, you have found a remarkable woman. Theresa, you have found a man with a good heart. May you have many years of happiness together." They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in Robert's room that he had painstakingly cleaned and prepared. He was gentle with her, patient and loving, and Theresa felt blessed beyond measure to have found such a man. The next morning, lying in his arms as dawn light filtered through the curtains, Theresa said, "I need to be back in town by Monday for school." "I know," Robert said, kissing her forehead. "I have been thinking about that. What if we got you a good horse, something steady and reliable? Then you could ride to town each morning and come home each evening. It is not that far, and I would worry less knowing you were home with me at night." "Would you teach me to ride well enough for that?" Theresa asked. "I can manage a horse, but not for 10 miles through countryside." "I will teach you everything you need to know," Robert promised. Over the next weeks, Robert did exactly that. He found a gentle mare named Daisy and spent hours teaching Theresa to ride confidently. By mid-December, Theresa was making the journey to and from town each day, sometimes accompanied by Robert, sometimes alone. She loved the independence of it, the time to think during the ride, the way the countryside looked in different lights and weathers. Christmas came, and with it a school pageant that Theresa organized. The children performed recitations and songs, and the whole town turned out to watch. Afterward, there were cookies and cider, and Theresa stood with Robert's arm around her waist, feeling a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. As winter deepened, Theresa settled into married life. She continued teaching, riding to town each morning and home each evening. Robert continued his studies, though now they read together in the evenings by the fire, discussing books and ideas. William often joined them, and the house felt warm and full of life. In January, a hard winter storm struck, dumping 2 feet of snow and making the roads impassable. Theresa stayed at the ranch for 3 days until the snow could be cleared. She worried about missing school, but Robert assured her the children's families would understand. "You cannot control the weather," he said sensibly. "Everyone knows that." When she finally made it back to town, she found that Jake and Peter, the 2 14-year-old boys who had been among her more challenging students, had kept the schoolhouse stove going and cleared the snow from the path. They greeted her sheepishly when she thanked them. "You are a good teacher, Miss Norton," Jake said, then corrected himself. "I mean, Mrs. Everett, we did not want the place to freeze up." That small gesture of respect and caring meant more to Theresa than she could express. Her students had grown to care about the school, about their education, about her. February brought Valentine's Day, and Robert surprised Theresa with a gift. It was a wooden bookshelf he had built himself, beautiful and sturdy, with carved details along the edges. "For all your books," he said. "I figured we would need it since you keep ordering more." Theresa ran her hands over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. "It is beautiful. You made this." "I have been working on it in the barn for weeks. Pa helped with some of the finer details." He looked pleased by her reaction. "Do you really like it?" "I love it, and I love you." She kissed him, pouring all her emotion into it. That night, as they arranged her books on the new shelves, Robert said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is it?" "The children who live far out on ranches and farms, they cannot come to school regularly. What if we started a lending library? Families could borrow books to read at home, and children could still be learning even when they cannot make it to town." Theresa turned to stare at him. "Robert, that is a brilliant idea, but we would need more books." "I will buy them," he said immediately. "Whatever we need. Education should not just be for town children." Over the next months, they built up a collection of books, some purchased, some donated by townspeople, some sent by Theresa's former teachers in Boston who had heard about the project. They created a system for lending and returning books. Families from the surrounding ranches and farms began stopping by the schoolhouse to borrow reading material. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, and Theresa took her students outside for nature lessons, teaching them about the plants and animals of their region. Robert often rode into town during lunchtime, ostensibly to check on some business but really just to see his wife. One afternoon in late April, Theresa realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She had been feeling tired and slightly nauseated in the mornings. She confided in Margaret Sullivan, who smiled knowingly. "You should see the doctor, dear, but I think you know what it means, doctor." Morrison confirmed what Theresa had suspected. She was expecting a child, due in late autumn. She rode home that day in a daze, trying to sort through her feelings. She was thrilled, certainly, but also worried about her teaching. Would she be able to continue? What would the town think? When she told Robert that evening, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with joy. "A baby. Theresa, we are going to have a baby," he set her down carefully. "Are you happy? You look worried." "I am happy," she assured him, "but I am concerned about school. I want to keep teaching as long as possible." "Then you will," Robert said firmly. "We will figure it out together." William was equally delighted when they told him. "A grandchild. This house needs the sound of children again." Theresa continued teaching through the spring and into early summer. Her pregnancy was progressing well, and though she was tired, she felt good. The town had responded to her news with warmth and support. Margaret Sullivan had immediately started knitting baby clothes. The schoolchildren were fascinated by the idea that Miss Norton was going to be a mother. As the school year wound down in late May, Theresa realized she needed to plan for the autumn when the baby would arrive. She spoke with the school board about hiring an assistant teacher who could take over her classes when she needed to be home with the baby. The board, consisting of 5 town leaders, agreed immediately. "You have done so much for this town's children," the chairman said. "We want to support you however we can." They hired a young man named Thomas Cooper, fresh from a teacher's college in St. Louis, who would start in the autumn term. Theresa felt better knowing the children would be well cared for during her absence. Summer was busy at the ranch. Robert and his father worked long hours with the cattle, and Theresa helped where she could while also preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes, arranged a nursery in one of the spare rooms, and read every book she could find about childbirth and infant care. In August, her parents surprised her by arriving unannounced. Her father was stiff and formal, but her mother embraced Theresa warmly. "We wanted to see you before the baby comes," her mother explained. "And your father wanted to meet Robert." The visit was initially awkward, but over the course of a week, Theresa's father gradually warmed to Robert. They went riding together, inspected the ranch, and had long talks about ranching, business, and the future. By the time her parents left, her father shook Robert's hand and said, "You have done well for yourself, and you will do well by my daughter." It was as close to approval as Theresa had ever received from him, and she was grateful. September arrived, and with it the new school year. Thomas Cooper proved to be a competent teacher, and Theresa worked with him for 2 weeks, introducing him to the students and the curriculum, before stepping back to prepare for the baby's imminent arrival. Her time came on a chilly October evening. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Robert stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, his face tight with worry. Margaret Sullivan served as midwife, calm and capable. Finally, in the early afternoon of October 15, 1874, their son was born. He was red-faced and squalling, perfectly healthy with a shock of dark hair like his father's. "A boy," Robert said wonderingly, holding his son for the first time. Tears streamed down his face. "Theresa, we have a son." "What shall we name him?" Theresa asked, exhausted but happy. Robert looked at his father, who stood in the doorway with his own eyes wet with tears. "William, after my pa, if that is all right with you." "I would love that," Theresa said softly. Little William, whom they called Liam to distinguish him from his grandfather, was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping reasonably peacefully. Theresa recovered quickly from the birth, and within a few weeks, she was helping Thomas with the school again, bringing Liam with her when needed. The townspeople doted on the baby. Margaret Sullivan loved to hold him. Theresa's students were fascinated by their teacher's child. Robert was a devoted father, coming home from the fields to hold his son, singing him to sleep with old cowboy songs. As autumn turned to winter, Theresa felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. She had her teaching, her family, her place in this community. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man she had been hired to teach but who had taught her so much about life, love, and belonging. One snowy December evening, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Theresa and Robert sat by the fire. Liam was asleep in his cradle. William had gone to bed early. The house was quiet and peaceful. "Are you happy?" Robert asked, pulling Theresa close. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she said honestly. "A year ago I was a new bride, nervous about the future. Now I have everything I never knew I wanted." "I am the one who has everything," Robert said. "A wife I love beyond measure, a healthy son, a good life. You changed everything for me, Theresa. You opened up the world. We changed things together," she corrected. "That is what love does." The years that followed were full and rich. Liam grew from infant to toddler to little boy, curious and bright like his parents. In the spring of 1877, a daughter joined the family. They named her Clara, after Theresa's grandmother. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's brown eyes. The lending library grew into a substantial collection, and neighboring towns heard about it and started their own. Theresa continued teaching, balancing her work with motherhood, supported by Robert and William and the whole community. Thomas Cooper became a permanent fixture at the school, and he and Theresa made an excellent team. Robert never stopped learning. He and Theresa continued to read together most evenings, working their way through literature, history, philosophy, and science. He became known throughout the county as an educated, thoughtful man as well as a skilled rancher. Several times he was asked to run for local office, though he always declined, saying he preferred the life he had. The Double E Ranch prospered under Robert and William's management. They treated their ranch hands fairly, paid good wages, and gained a reputation for integrity. When William passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1880, the whole town mourned him. He left the ranch to Robert and Theresa, knowing it was in good hands. By 1882, the schoolhouse in Independence had been rebuilt into a larger, better structure. Theresa had been instrumental in raising the funds and overseeing the construction. The new building had 2 classrooms, a library room, and even a small science laboratory. It was a far cry from the crumbling structure she had first encountered 9 years earlier. At the dedication ceremony for the new school, the mayor called Theresa to the front. "Mrs. Everett came to our town in 1873 to teach our children. She has done that, and so much more. She has built a true center of learning here, something that will benefit generations to come. This school stands as a testament to what one dedicated person can accomplish. The crowd applauded, and Theresa looked out at all the faces she had come to know and love over the years. Her students past and present, her friends and neighbors, her children, Liam and Clara, sitting with Margaret Sullivan in the front row, and Robert, standing at the back with a smile on his face that held all the love in the world. After the ceremony, Robert came to her and took her hand. "I am so proud of you," he said quietly. "I am proud of us," Theresa replied. "None of this would have been possible without you, without this town, without everyone working together." That evening, as they rode home to the ranch together with their children, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left Boston seeking independence and purpose. She had found those things, certainly, but she had also found something she had not known she was looking for: a home, a community, a family, and a love that had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. As if reading her thoughts, Robert said, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving Boston, coming to a frontier town, all of it?" "Never," Theresa said immediately. "Not for a single moment. This life, this place, you, our children, it is everything I could want and more." "Good," Robert said softly, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You taught me to read and write, but more than that, you taught me what it means to truly love someone." In the summer of 1883, Theresa discovered she was expecting their third child. She was 32 years old now, a little older than she had been with the other two, but the pregnancy progressed smoothly. In late January of 1884, their second son was born. They named him James, and he proved to be a quiet, observant baby content to watch the world around him. The family settled into their new configuration. Liam was 9 years old, already showing an interest in books and learning that rivaled his mother's. Clara was 6, full of energy and questions, keeping everyone on their toes. Little James completed the circle, a peaceful presence in their busy household. Theresa had reduced her teaching hours somewhat, now working 3 days a week at the school and spending the other days at home with the children. Thomas Cooper had taken over as the primary teacher, and 2 additional teachers had been hired to manage the growing student population. But Theresa remained deeply involved in the school's direction and curriculum. One spring afternoon in 1885, Theresa was working in the garden behind their house while the children played nearby. Robert came out from the barn and sat beside her, watching her work. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How fast time goes," Theresa said, sitting back on her heels. "It has been almost 12 years since I arrived in independence. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "It has been a good life, though, has it not?" "The best life," Theresa confirmed. "Better than I ever imagined." Liam ran over, holding a book. "Ma, what does this word mean?" He pointed to a passage. Theresa cleaned her hands on her apron and looked at the word. "Perseverance. It means continuing to work towards something even when it is difficult, not giving up." "Like when you kept fixing up the old schoolhouse even though it was really broken?" Liam asked. "Exactly like that." Robert smiled. "Your mother is the most persevering person I know." "Pa, you are too," Clara said, abandoning the flowers she had been picking to join them. "Grandpa William told me you kept practicing your letters every single night until you could read whole books." "I had a good teacher," Robert said, his eyes meeting Theresa's. "And I had a good student," Theresa replied softly. That evening, after the children were asleep, Robert and Theresa sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The spring air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of new grass and wildflowers. You remember that first lesson? Robert asked. When you had me reading from that primer, I remember thinking you were nervous, Theresa said. And I remember being surprised by how much you already understood, how quickly you learned. I was terrified, Robert admitted. I thought you would think I was stupid, a grown man who could barely read. I never thought that. I thought you were brave for wanting to learn. I did not feel brave, but then you smiled at me and I thought maybe everything would be all right. Robert took her hand. I fell in love with you during those lessons, you know, a little more each day. The way you explained things with such patience. The way your face lit up when I understood something new. The way you believed in me. I fell in love with you too, Theresa said. I tried not to at first, told myself it was inappropriate, but you made it impossible not to love you. Do you remember when I asked you to teach my heart? Robert asked. I remember everything about that day, Theresa said. I was terrified and thrilled all at once. Best decision I ever made, Robert said. Asking you that question. Best decision I ever made was saying yes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. This was their life. Simple moments of connection, of shared history and mutual love. This was what mattered. In the following years, the family continued to grow and thrive. Liam proved to be an excellent student, eventually going to study at a university in St. Louis. Clara followed her mother into teaching, helping at the school from a young age. James showed a gift for working with animals and took naturally to ranching alongside his father. The town of Independence continued to grow as well. The railroad came through in 1886, bringing new opportunities and new residents. The school expanded again. New businesses opened. But through all the changes, the Double E Ranch remained a constant, a well-run, prosperous operation known throughout Missouri. Theresa continued her work with education, serving on the territorial school board and advocating for better funding and resources for rural schools. She wrote articles for educational journals, sharing what she had learned about frontier education. She started a program to train new teachers, passing on her knowledge and experience. Robert became a respected community leader, serving as a mediator in disputes, advising younger ranchers and supporting various civic improvements. He never forgot the value of education, and he generously funded scholarships for students who wanted to continue their studies beyond what independence could offer. In the summer of 1895, Theresa and Robert celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. Their children were grown now. Liam was 20, working as a journalist in St. Louis but visiting home often. Clara was 18, teaching at the school alongside Thomas Cooper. James was 11, a quiet, capable boy who seemed born to ranch life. The anniversary celebration was a quiet affair, just the family at the ranch. After dinner, Liam proposed a toast. To Ma and Pa, who have shown us what real love looks like. You have built something beautiful together, not just this ranch or the school, but a life full of meaning and purpose. You taught us that education matters, that hard work pays off, and that treating people with respect and kindness is the most important thing. Thank you for being the parents and people you are. Theresa wiped away tears as the children raised their glasses. She looked at Robert, seeing the lines that time had etched around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, but also seeing the same man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. We did well, did we not? Robert said softly, just to her. We did very well, Theresa agreed. As autumn approached in 1895, Theresa began to feel her age in ways she had not before. She was 44 now, and while still healthy and active, she found herself tiring more easily. She cut back her teaching schedule a bit more, spending more time at home, more time with Robert. One October afternoon, Robert took her riding to a spot they had discovered years ago, a high meadow with a view of the surrounding countryside. They had not been there in years, but the place was as beautiful as she remembered. "I wanted to bring you here again," Robert said as they dismounted and sat on a fallen log. "This is where I first told you I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember. It was spring, and the wildflowers were blooming everywhere. I meant what I said that day, and I mean it still. Spending my life with you has been the greatest blessing I could imagine." Theresa leaned against him. "We have had a good life, Robert, a very good life. We have, and we will have many more years ahead of us." "I intend to grow old with you, Theresa Everett, very old and very happy," she laughed. "I intend the same thing." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. In 1898, Liam married a lovely young woman he had met in St. Louis, and they gave Theresa and Robert their first grandchild, a granddaughter named Eleanor. In 1900, Clara married Thomas Cooper in a ceremony at the church where Theresa and Robert had wed nearly 30 years earlier. James showed no interest in marriage yet, content with ranch life and his horses. By the turn of the century, Theresa had officially retired from teaching, though she still visited the school regularly and mentored new teachers. The school now had 6 full-time teachers and over 100 students. The lending library had grown to include over 1,000 volumes. The town of Independence had become a thriving community, and education was valued by everyone. On a warm evening in late May of 1903, Theresa and Robert sat on their porch, as they had done countless times over the years. They were both in their 50s now, their children grown, their life's work mostly done. But they still had each other, still had the deep connection that had formed in a small schoolhouse 30 years earlier. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked, as he so often did. "I am thinking about how unexpected life is," Theresa said. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in Independence in 1873, I had no idea what was ahead of me. I thought I was just coming to teach children." "And instead you taught a whole town," Robert said, "including one stubborn rancher's son." "You were not stubborn. You were determined. There is a difference." "Well, I was determined to make you fall in love with me," Theresa laughed. "I did not stand a chance against that determination." "No," Robert agreed, smiling, "you did not." They sat quietly for a moment, then Robert said, "You know what the best part has been?" "What?" "Growing together. We have both changed so much over the years, learned so much, experienced so much, but we changed together, grew together. That is what makes a good marriage, I think. Not staying the same, but evolving together." "You have become quite the philosopher," Theresa teased gently. "I had a good teacher," Robert said, as he always did. As the sun set on another day, painting the Missouri sky in brilliant colors, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking purpose and found so much more. She had found love, family, community, and a sense of belonging she had never experienced in Boston. She had made a difference in the lives of countless children and their families. She had built something lasting and meaningful, but more than any of that, she had found Robert. The rancher's son who had asked her to teach his heart, and who had in turn taught her what it meant to be truly loved, truly valued, truly home. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times over the years. "And I love you," Robert replied, as he always did. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." In the twilight they sat together, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and purpose together, who had loved deeply and well. The story that had begun with a young woman stepping off a stagecoach and a rancher's son seeking to better himself had become something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of education, determination, and most of all, love. Their legacy lived on in the school that bore Theresa's name, in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, in the town that had embraced them both, and in the countless lives they had touched over the decades. But their greatest legacy was the love they shared, a love that had started in a small schoolhouse and grown to fill their entire lives. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Robert and Theresa remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts united, perfectly content with the life they had built together. It was a life neither could have imagined when they first met, but it was exactly the life they both needed. And as they finally rose to go inside, they carried with them the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had not only endured but had deepened with every passing year, a partnership built on respect, admiration, and an unshakable commitment to each other and to the values they shared. The lights in the ranch house glowed warmly against the night, a beacon of home and love, just as they had for 30 years, and just as they would continue to be for all the years to come. This was their story, complete and whole, a tale of the Wild West, of education and determination, of a rancher's son and a Boston schoolteacher who found each other and built something beautiful together. And it was, in every way that mattered, a story with the happiest of endings.